Here we are. This is 141 Cryptography, and we are down to stream ciphers. So that's the plan here, and I got the padding oracle project finally working. It's been broken for a couple of years, the advanced one. I just got it working right before class, so I'll show you that. All right, so let's talk about stream ciphers. And I have some material here because they keep coming up in class that people might be interested in about the NSA, of course. This is, a lot of people are concerned, and it comes up all the time, about how much the NSA is lying to us and tricking us into using broken cryptography. And here's a video from somebody famous who says he doesn't think it's happening too much. But here's some of the history. The NSA first week in DES. Originally, IBM proposed I thought they proposed a 128-bit key. I've heard them say that, but anyway, they had a 64-bit key, and they shortened it for 56 bits before turning it into an official approved encryption scheme. And as we're going to see, they were really not, this was really important. This became the encryption standard in America for decades, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and was built into all kinds of hardware, like financial instruments and stuff. And anyway, but the NSA also strengthened it, improving the S-box to resist differential cryptanalysis, which was a secret technique at the time. So the S-box is used to scramble the data, we talked about it last time, in the DES system, and differential cryptanalysis is where you have two similar plain texts and you encrypt them and see what similarity there is in the output. So this is very close to what you do a lot in physics, where you make a small change in something and see what small change comes out here. And they had this technique which was not known outside national security circles, but they hardened it, and that was the point of no-bus. No-bus is what the NSA wants. They want nobody but us. They want every cryptographic system to have a secret backdoor that nobody knows except us, and then they can read it, but nobody else can. That's their goal. If they could achieve that, that would make a lot of sense. Then the government could inspect things to find terrorism and crime, but bad guys wouldn't be able to get in, criminals and stuff. Now, the problem is, there's several problems. The first thing is once you make a weak spot, you don't know that nobody else can find it. In fact, eventually, many classified things like public key cryptography and differential cryptanalysis were invented on the outside. So that's a worry. The other thing is, as Snowden made fantastically obvious, the NSA cannot keep their secrets. And this whole system relies upon them not leaking out the information about the secret key, and yet they do not seem to have the ability to keep secrets, which is kind of absolutely right at the center of their mission. But this is the problem. If a bunch of people know something, some of them are going to leak it out or get bribed or something. So that's a problem. Anyway, that's what they were trying to do, and this is how they tried to do it at that time. They weakened the key so they could break it with their powerful computers, probably with brute force, and they strengthened it in other ways, hoping that that would help stop the other people from getting it. And then, of course, Snowden, leaked the secrets and blew the whistle off all this stuff, and therefore exposed the fact that the NSA is not very good at keeping secrets, and that kind of fouls up their whole threat model. And then, in 2017, the Russians, pretending to be Ukrainians, or from a nation, stole information, NSA secret products, which were leaked because a contractor put them on their home system where they weren't supposed to be, and the home system had Kaspersky antivirus on it. And the Kaspersky antivirus detected them as malware and sent the samples back to Kaspersky. Now, Kaspersky says they didn't willingly hand them over to the KGB, but just like the NSA was hacking into every American company at this time, Microsoft and Yahoo and Google, and stealing their stuff, they say the KGB was hacking Kaspersky and stealing their stuff, which might very well be true. Although, I think American companies can't really say no to the government, and I think Russian companies much less can say no to the government. So anyway, that's how the KGB got it, the Russian military, and they used it to spread the WannaCry worm, using an exploit that the NSA had found in Windows and kept secret so they could use it. They did not tell Microsoft to patch it, although apparently they knew it had gotten stolen because a few months before this, a patch mysteriously appeared. So I think they found out it got stolen. They told Microsoft so Microsoft could patch it to try to limit the harm of this worm, but the problem is a lot of Microsoft shops don't update their stuff promptly. Most of them don't, because as anybody who's been a system administrator can tell you, the patches break everything. you'll get fired. I got in trouble for that. I would patch things, it would break everything. It's hard to trust Windows patches. So anyway, this led to WannaCry that did enormous damage, including fouling up hospital services in Britain and probably leading to some deaths. So this has led many cryptographers to have a really bad attitude about the NSA. One reasonable interpretation of this is that the NSA is just messing up the world with their hopeless goal at achieving something that just cannot be done, and they're breaking a lot of cryptography on the way. And that's why many cryptographers are very, very, very frustrated and angry at the NSA and their effect on the National Institute of Standards. So anyway, it comes up in this class a lot, and I think it's worth talking about. Let me see here. What a beautiful name for a dark incident like Operation Aurora. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. Anyway, so let's talk about stream ciphers. We're going to talk about how they work, hardware and software, and what can go wrong. So a stream cipher. We've talked about block ciphers last time, where you have a block of 64 or 128 bits, and you encrypt it one block at a time. Now, block and stream ciphers are both symmetric ciphers. They are the kind of cryptography that has been around for more than 2,000 years, where you have a secret key, and you have to somehow give the secret key to the person you're sending the message to. This is a fundamental weakness of all private key cryptography, is the key distribution problem. How do you know that only the right person has the key, and they haven't lost it or had it stolen or shared it with somebody, and you don't know, and if they do that, that fouls up the security model. That's why the invention of public key cryptography in 1979 revolutionized this. And the NSA had it a couple decades earlier, supposedly, although they haven't admitted that, but it became public use for everybody around 79, when in particular there was a very seminal Scientific American article that I read and my entire generation of technical enthusiasts read, and it was amazing. It was a miracle. You could now solve the key distribution problem. You could talk to somebody without previously transmitting a secret key to them. But anyway, right now we're doing private key encryption. So that's what this is. The secret key is shared. So block ciphers take blocks of plain text, mix it with the key, and produce blocks of ciphertext. Stream ciphers use the key to create a stream of bits, and then they just XOR the stream at the plain text. So they do not have any need for block sizes or padding. The data can be of any length, and they just XOR it with enough stream of that length. So that's the difference. So how do you make a stream of random bits? Now, if they were really random, they wouldn't do you any good, because then the person at the other end could not create the same bit stream to decrypt it. And of course, if you had a one-time pad of just a long stream of bits, and then you gave it to the person at the other end, that would be the one-time pad, which is perfect and unbreakable, but it has an enormous key distribution problem. You have to send a key that is as long as the total of all the messages you will ever send, which is crazy. So what you're trying to do is find a more convenient way to accomplish that by having a mathematical process that will create a pseudo-random series of bits that can be reproduced from a key, and now you deliver the key to the other end, and they can independently recreate that series of bits. That's what all these are doing. So you use a key and a nonce. The key is used for many messages, and the nonce changes for each message, and the nonce is sent with each message in plain text. So you have a key, and you feed in the nonce. Then you run it through your algorithm. This creates a key stream of pseudo-random bits, and you just XOR those bits with the plain text to make the ciphertext. So if you were to use the key and the nonce a second time, you'd create exactly the same bit stream. And if you do two messages XORed with the same bit stream, then that ruins everything. In particular, if one of the messages is all zeros, then XORing the two messages together will cause part of it to become clear, which is what happened to Microsoft at Microsoft Office. And just like we talked about before, Russia made this error in World War II with their one-time pads. Microsoft made this error before 2007. And we talked about last time how this works. If you use the same bit stream twice, it becomes very easy to crack these messages even without using computers. So there's two types of stream ciphers: stateful ciphers and counter-based ciphers. You can either have a counter, which somehow creates blocks of random text, or you can have an internal state that keeps changing. These are two ways to do it. So the state, you initialize it with a key and a nonce. you initialize it and start out the state, and then you just call update, which updates the state and gives you some ciphertext bits, and then update it again, and update it again, and you get more bits, more bits, more bits. That's how you create your bits. The counter-based stream. Now, one problem with this is it cannot be parallelized. You have to do this function before you can do that function. You have to do this function before you can do that one. So this is really only good for a single processor machine. And in the modern days, especially with GPUs, we have highly parallel machines, so the counter-based system is much better. You feed in a key nonce and a counter, and then you have a whole series of counter numbers here, which probably aren't just counting up, they're probably doing some kind of function. The best one we talked about last time is the Galois counter mode. And then each of these can be calculated independently to give you blocks of key stream bits. You can make as many as you want. So that's the other way to do it. All right, anyway, you can do this with dedicated hardware. Now, mostly we're doing on general purpose computers with general purpose processors, but you could build hardware just to be encrypting. It's just to encrypt things. You can do it with application-specific integrated circuits, which have got over the news because of cryptocurrency. There are special ASICs that are built just to mine Ethereum, just to mine Bitcoin, and they're much, much faster and much more efficient than using general purpose circuits like field programmable gate arrays. So in a software implementation, you use Microsoft instructions like microprocessor instructions like add and subtract, and this will process your blocks of 32-bit words or 64-bit words, depending on how big your processing word is. And your hardware, it just works with the bits. Each bit comes in a separate line, it goes through logic gates and gets processed to come out. The hardware is much faster and much more efficient. Now, the first stream ciphers required less memory and fewer logic gates than block ciphers, so they were cheaper to implement in hardware. So that's why they liked the stream ciphers. It required less than 1,000 gate equivalents, but software-oriented block ciphers required 10,000 gate equivalents. So it would be cheaper to manufacture hardware to do this, and that was the one point of DES. Now, as we mentioned, DES was apparently deliberately weakened so the NSA could sneak in, which would be consistent with their official goals. However, they also optimized it so it could run on hardware. In the 1970s, it was mostly hardware applications, and that's why they used this S-box, where they'd look things up. That was something small and fast in hardware and inefficient in software. Now, AES is designed for software, more like that, more efficient in software than DES, although, as we said, most people, in fact, use special hardware for AES. Almost every modern processor has special AES commands just to make it fast and to defeat timing attacks, because it always takes a constant amount of time for a hardware, specialized hardware, to get to the answer, whereas software, going through loops and algorithms, takes a different amount of time depending on the key, and therefore leaks out information about the key and the timing and the radio emitted and the power consumed, whereas hardware largely fixes those problems. So ASIC, here's an example. If you want to get cryptocurrency miners, the ASICs are the fastest, and it's 100 times faster than a CPU for Bitcoin. GPUs are not as fast but cheaper, and CPUs are so slow that you can never win any Bitcoin by mining with Bitcoin as of a few years ago. I don't know the current situation. Bitcoin price fell and it got banned by China, and they moved to Texas, and so I don't know the current state of Bitcoin mining. But
it fell again. It was 30,000 in July, then it fell in early September to 25, around 26 fluctuating.
Yeah, it hasn't gone up. It'll probably go up again in a year or two, but until it goes up again, everybody's sort of lost interest.
Kathy Wood was the big, what do you call, advocate for the use of Bitcoin, lost a lot of money. She had a Bitcoin fund, index fund, and she lost close to $1 billion money.
Who did?
Kathy Wood.
Kathy Wood, yeah. A lot of people lost a lot of money on it. And I must say, it was supposed to be a hedge against inflation, and that did not work. So at least one use case is gone.
It's actually an exaggerator of inflation, because honestly it loses much more money, it's much less predictable than inflation.
Yes.
Inflation
So
is correlated to the price of oil right now.
Yeah.
If the price goes up, the inflation grows with it. If the oil
Yes.
drops, then the inflation actually goes into deflation.
Yeah, so it's very hard to understand why an American would get in Bitcoin now. There are countries like, I think, Venezuela, where the local currency is so terrible, you're still probably better off with Bitcoin. But America, there's a lot of better places to put your money. Anyway, so let's talk about how you make these random bits. A shift register works like this. You just shift to the left. So you start with a bunch of ones, you shift, one falls off the end, you fill with zeros on the right. So this will just give you a series of 8 ones, and then it'll give you nothing but zeros after that, if all you do is shift. All right, however, If you start with a different number, like 170, then you'll get 101010, but still it's just going to give you 8 bits, and then it'll get nothing but zeros. So they use a feedback shift register to do this. You have a register of bits, and it's got a feedback function. So you shift to the left, the bit that falls off to the left is the output bit, and then you have a feedback function to calculate what bit to put in. You don't always fill with zeros. Sometimes you fill with 0, sometimes you fill with 1. So here's a 4-bit example. If your feedback function XORs all the bits, then I start with this number, 1100, I shift it to the left. Now, if I XOR these, I get a 1. So if I XOR these, I get a 0, so I fill with a 0. XOR these, I get a 1, so I fill with a 1. I fill this time with a 1, this time with a 0, this time with a 0. So you get a series of 5 different numbers, and then you're back to the first number, and it will always repeat over and over. So in principle, there are 16 possible nibbles here, but this only gives you 5 of them in a loop. All right? So there you see you get a loop. In fact, if you consider that shift register, there's a loop of 5, another loop of 5, another loop of 5, and then zeros will always stay 0. So this is the cycles available for that 4-bit feedback shift register. So a linear feedback shift register uses the XOR of some of the bits in the state. That's a linear feedback shift register with a period of 5. The longest possible period is 2 to the n minus 1, because if you XOR the bits, the one that's all zeros will always fill with zeros and stay zeros, so you always have this one standing alone. But in an optimum condition, you'd have all these tied together in one big loop. So you could get 2 to the n minus 1. All right. So here's another one. You XOR only 3 of the bits, but not this bit. This one, 1101, you feed just the 3 bits instead of all 4 bits every time. If you do that, start at 1. You're going to get 110, you can figure it out. Your period is 6 in this one instead of 5. It's not perfect, but you get a period of 6. Here's one with the maximal period. You XOR only these 2 bits. So if you start at 0001, it's going to give, these 2 bits are 0, so you get 0. Then you're going to get 0 the next time. Then you're going to get 1 the next 2 times as this one passes through, and so on. So you can figure it out. This is actually going to give you 15 possibilities. It goes through all these, and you notice the last one is equal to the first one, and 0000 is not present. So that one gives you the 15-bit cycle, and which is the most you can get. So the problem with them is they're insecure. An attacker only needs n output bits to recover initial state. So if they have, this is 4 bits, if an attacker has any 4 of these bits, 4 of these outputs, they can deduce the whole thing from that, because it's too simple. You're using nothing but XOR. There's really only a small number of possible ways to XOR these bits together, and so there's an algorithm that solves it, and that means it's not safe, it's not secure. So you can use a filtered linear feedback shift register that passes the bits through a nonlinear function. So you take some of the bits, you feed them through some nonlinear function to figure out what to do, and there you'll use something like AND along with XOR, so it's just not as simple. That's the plan. Now, filtered linear feedback shift registers are still weak. The G function hides the linearity of the system, but there are more complicated attacks out there which will deduce what that function is doing. So, what you do is you can make a complicated function here that just makes it very hard to analyze, attacker analyze, and there is now no way to calculate the period or to know if it's maximal. So what you do in practice, and I suppose you're getting used to this in this course, you have this math, but when you actually need to make a practical system, you wander past the math and you do something you're not really sure if it's right or wrong. All our cryptography is based on sort of guesses, not on a beautiful closed proof that it's perfect. So you make this complicated mess that's so complicated you can't really analyze it, and you figure there, that must be pretty strong, and you're not sure if it's really good, so what you do is you combine 2 of them. You combine a linear feedback shift register with a nonlinear feedback shift register, because this one is hard to analyze, and you think it might be secure, but you don't know if it's got the maximal length. So you make a linear one that has the maximal length, because you can calculate that, and you mix the 2 together. This is what you tend to have. It's like you have a bucket with a hole in it, so you put it in a bigger bucket that also has a hole in it. You can worry about it, but this is what it really is, and this is what all these cryptographic systems are. You find an attack, so you put in some kind of patch to stop that attack. So you find another attack, you put in some kind of patch to stop that attack, and after you've patched every known attack, you call it secure and you use it. But that's all you can do. That's the way all internet protocols are. And that's why everything keeps changing. They keep finding problems and they keep having to go to the next one. But anyway, this is what they do. Grain 128A is considered a very good bit stream generator. And so it's got 128-bit linear and 128-bit nonlinear and a filter function. So it's got a period of 2 to the 128 minus 1, which is really good. And so as you can see, this approximates that one-time pad. All I have to do is give you a key and use grain 128, and now you have essentially infinite amount of bits that we can reproduce at both ends as if I gave you a one-time pad with 2 to the 128 bits on it, as long as nobody finds any shortcuts. So it takes a 128-bit key and a 96-bit nonce, and off it goes. And the feedback function is this horrible mess. N32 plus N37 plus N72 plus things multiplying through 3 and 4 at a time. That's the complicated function they decided, which scrambles it in a way that nobody can figure out how to unscramble this with any reasonable efficiency from any reasonable number of bits. That's the idea. So the security, it was proposed in 2006, and they found that it might be susceptible to a side channel fault attack, which would mean that if you make mistakes in the calculation, data will leak out, which, by the way, is true of RSA2. There was a very seminal paper came out about 15 years ago where they took RSA, running with the OpenSSL code, and then they lowered the processor voltage so the processor would make mistakes. And if the processor drops 1 bit during the calculation, that leaks out information about the key. So doing as few as 100 encryptions, or doing a bunch of encryptions to where 100 of them have dropped 1 bit is enough to deduce the whole key. And so the same thing apparently was true here. If it makes mistakes while processing, it leaks out information. So they made a better version, 128A, and that seems to be very good. Since 2011, nobody's found a major hole in it. And so it's used in some proprietary industrial systems. Now, there's another recurring theme in cryptography we're going to see over and over, which is there is a new system that is better, but nobody uses it. This happens all the time because you standardize on something. Everybody starts using it. They build the software. They build the hardware. Then somebody invents a new one, and nobody wants to bother upgrading to the new one until the old one is broken. Because why should they? They say, mathematicians say, well, in some theoretical sense, the new one is better. And they say, yeah, I got money to make here. I got devices. I'm not going to buy a whole bunch of new hardware because of some theoretical problem. Let me know when there's a real problem. That's the way it is. So nobody is using grain 128A much, I think, but they will eventually. So they used a lot of horrible things in the past. A51 was used for the 2G voice communications. And this is another thing that people used to do more than they do now, is they would keep everything secret. That was the old theory. Come up with a cryptographic system and keep it secret. That'll make it more secure. The open source people, the kind of people that are mad at the NIST, National Institute, NSA, say, no, this is wrong. You should make everything public and let the whole world test it and take one that can withstand the attack even when everybody can see the code. But that's not what was happened. A lot of things were kept secret. So it was created and kept secret. And then in the 80s and 90s, the United States wanted to avoid exporting strong crypto in the hopes that our enemies would not have good mathematicians and invent good crypto. So we had these cryptographically weak versions of everything that were put out even up through the 90s, which have poisoned the internet with all these devices that use breakable encryption and all these servers that can be downgraded to use the breakable encryption because they want to talk to those old devices. This is one of the other things that makes cryptographers have a really bad attitude. Anyway, I think I'm missing my link when the Kahoot should come. I guess I got one at the end. Oh, there we are. It's coming up. Good. Just thought I was going to miss it. All right. So A51, its design was leaked in 94. It was reverse engineered in 99. And so in 2014, there were billions of people using it, but it has serious security weaknesses, and the NSA can just routinely decrypt it. So the way it worked was you had 3 linear feedback shift registers using these functions, F1, F2, and F3, with different lengths, 19 bits, 22 bits, and 23 bits. And so instead of updating all 3 linear feedback shift registers at each clock cycle, they had a pattern it would read certain bits called the clocking bits, and then it would determine which one to update based on the clocking bits, just to make it more scrambled. So it has a 64-bit key, but it's used in this weird pattern, 19 bits here, 22 bits here, and 23 bits here. So if you were to try all 2 to the 64 possible keys, that would be pretty hard. 2 to the 64 is pretty expensive, although not impossible. TES was cracked by brute forcing 2 to the 56. 2 to the 64 is probably not impossible on modern hardware, but quite expensive. So there's no defense against this attack, but there are faster attacks. And there are subtle attacks, so various ways. Now one way is exploit the short key. There's a 64-bit key and a 22-bit nonce. You could brute force internal states, though, one by one. That gets you down to 252, and that's the problem. Since it's broken up into these little chunks, you could break the little pieces one by one, like we talked about before, the meet in the middle attack. If you can somehow break the problem into chunks, it can get much faster to solve, and that gets you from 2 to the 64 down to 2 to the 52. But that'll take some time anyway. And here's the attack here. All right, but there's another one. You speed it up using time-memory trade-off. You make a rainbow table, they call it. You use a lot of RAM. You make a table that looks up things that are hard to calculate, so you only have to calculate it once, and now you look it up as you try all these keys. Pre-calculate something, some portion of it, make a big table. And then there's a codebook attack. That's another way. Pre-calculate the output for all 2 to the 64 possible keys. We talked about this before. Then look up the key. But if you wanted to do that, you need 2 to the 64 bytes of RAM, which is 200 million terabytes. So that's not reasonable. You can't afford to buy that much RAM. There probably isn't that much RAM in the world. So that's not a good answer. But what you do is you mix these up. You make a smaller lookup table, not 2 to the 64. You perform more computation during the online phase. And in 2010, researchers spent 2 months to calculate a 2 terabyte table, and using GPUs running 100,000 instances of it in parallel, they were able to decrypt phone calls in near real time. And I remember seeing this at DEF CON. They said, we have a device that can decrypt 64-bit encrypted telephone calls live, or you can just hear them. And I said, 2 to the 64, that's impossible, but this is how they did it. It's not impossible because there are weaknesses in the algorithm. It ought to be impossible, but they were able to do it. So they abandoned it, and then they moved to Kasumi for 3G, and people are concerned that the NSA has built a backdoor into Kasumi, although they haven't proven it. But there's a link if you want to read about that. So this is the world of crypto, where you have to struggle. Yes, Apple uses triple dash to avoid meet in the middle, exactly. All right, so let's try Kahoot.
Do we know what's used for 5G networks?
Know what?
Do we know what's used for 5G networks?
I don't. It's a good question. What's used by 5G?
Is there a game pin? No.
There will be.
I'm sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, that's fine. There will be in just a minute here. There 5A. There you go. The pin will appear. There you are. There's the pin. Good. That's the right answer. The right question. Yeah. Go to kahoot.it and put in that pin. So, this is, I was sort of surprised when I learned this. Cryptographers are like angry political activists. They spend a lot of time talking about how rotten the government is and how the government does everything wrong. And this will never stop. The government keeps trying to outlaw cryptography and demand a backdoor. They're demanding it again in Britain. They're demanding that they hand over plain text of everything. And companies like Meta are saying, no, just pull out of Britain rather than decrypt their stuff. A lot of other countries demand that you have it decrypted at a server in their country under their control. And a lot of companies do that. BlackBerry did that. All BlackBerry phone calls in United Arab Emirates have an endpoint in the country where it's decrypted and then re-encrypted and sent on so the government can inspect it. And this is true of almost every company, too. Almost every company, man in the middle is HTTPS. So when you make an HTTPS connection from company, there's a point where they can decrypt it and examine it. They kind of have to check for viruses, malware, known bad URLs, death threats, racist stuff, because the company's liable for all that if it's sent on their company's devices. So they need to be able to inspect the traffic. Secrets leaking out, and they typically do. They don't allow end-to-end encryption outside most companies anymore, large companies. All right, let's give it a try.
It's much easier to use than before. Before it was very difficult to log into.
What was? Let's go. Oh, good. I'm glad it's working. Yeah. All right. So what kind of stream cipher uses init and update? Yep, that's stateful. You initialize the state, and then you keep updating a state to get another block of random bits, or pseudo-random bits. Which cipher was designed in the 1970s for hardware? TES, the data encryption standard used for everything for decades in America. Which system do you break with the Burley-Camp-Massey algorithm? It's kind of spelled wrong, but I'm not sure. The linear feedback shift registers can be broken with that. All right, which system uses a LSSR and an NFSR? Grain 128, the newest and best, mixes those two things together and has lasted for more than a decade without having a weakness found in it, which is not as reassuring as you might like. I mean, you'd like to think you proved it's completely secure, and very far from that. All we know is no public mathematician has published a way to get in for 10 years or more, so that's how good it is. All right. Okay. CF1212. Good. All right, let's carry on here. So, your software-oriented stream ciphers work with 32 or 64-bit words, of course, to fit into a word in the processor, and that makes them more efficient on modern CPUs. Now, stream ciphers became popular because block ciphers suffered from padding oracle attacks, which we're going to play with. In fact, you shifted back and forth from one to the other. So RC4 was a popular stream cipher. This was invented by Ron Rivest, who invented a bunch of these. He's the R in RSA, and also in a whole lot of, he also, I think, invented MD4 and MD5 and stuff. He invented a ton of stuff. The MIT researcher and his students also hacked the Boston subway by reverse engineering the magnetic cards, which are the same ones they use at BART. Anyway, did a lot of things. This was extremely popular, RC4, used in web and TLS. And finally, in the 2015 and so, everybody got tired of using it and quit using it because it has some flaws. So here's how it works. It's actually pretty amazing. You have an internal state is 256 bytes, and you start it at every possible byte, 0 to 255. And then you just shuffle those values around like a deck of cards. There's no XOR, no OR, no AND, or anything. So what you do is you start out with those cards, and then you iterate from 0 to 255, and each time you take the value and you add some other values. Here's the key. You take bytes of the key and combine it to determine where to move the card. So you add in, you take the J starts at 0, is the location of this card. You calculate a new location for that card this way, by including bytes from the key and then you swap I and J. So you take 2 cards and swap them. Then you calculate a point, take another 2 cards and swap them, and you do that 256 times. So your original bytes just get reordered into a different order. That's it. It's very strange. It's like 3-card Monte, where you're just moving things around. That's how it works, and it's real fast. And so you want to encode plain text that's m bytes long. It creates m bytes of key stream, what it does. So it's very fast and turns out to have some serious flaws, but it was used by a lot of systems like wired equivalent privacy to encrypt wireless data in 802.11b, and it doesn't support a nonce. There's just a key, there is no nonce. So WEP takes the first 24 bits of the key and just calls that a nonce. Now this is a really bad idea. And here's another thing you'll find a lot of times in cryptography. You design a system, and then the system is tested mathematically to achieve a certain purpose, and then you just use it some other way, which is not the way it was designed for. For example, cipher block chaining we talked about last time. A lot of systems will take encrypted data, and if they decrypt it and it makes sense, they take that as proof that you must be the administrator, you must have the key. Now there's a separate process called authentication to figure out who you are, which is different, which is what they should have used. Proving that you can decrypt something and interpreting that as authentication is an error, and taking the key and just taking part of it and calling it a nonce is not a good idea, because remember, the nonce is going to be sent in plain text along with the message. How do you know that's okay? That doesn't sound okay, and as you might imagine, that in fact is not okay. But that's what they did. Take a cryptography that doesn't have a nonce. Instead of using a system that has a nonce, just take the key and use it as a nonce. So in first place, a 24-bit nonce is too short. If you just have random 24-bit nonces, it'll only take 2 to the 12 packets before you have a duplicate nonce, 4096. That's from the birthday paradox. So in fact, after 4,000 packets of WEP, you'll have a nonce collision. So that's not good, because they'll be encrypted with identical key streams. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's sent in clear text. That means the first 3 bytes of the key are known. That opens the door to deducing more bytes of the key, especially since in wireless packets, most of the packets on a wireless network are ARP packets. You can easily spot them because they're the smallest, and you know about 80% of them anyway, because they all say the same thing. Who has 192.168.1.1? Tell 192.168.1.100. They pretty much all say that, and most of the bits of that are always the same. So you actually know the plain text of a whole bunch of those packets, which gives you another way to attack them. So there are so many holes. So WEP fell apart really fast. It was ratified in 1999. Attacks started coming out in 2001, and people came up with faster and faster and stronger attacks. So it was ridiculous. I used to give my students homework of cracking WEP, and you could do it in like 5 or 10 minutes on a modern system. But almost nobody uses it anymore for anything. So that was a flaw. However, that wasn't all fundamental flaws in RC4, but there are some entertaining fundamental flaws in RC4. And here's something. TLS doesn't try to add a nonce. It used it for RC4. Early versions of HTTPS, TLS used on the internet used it. The problem is RC4 is not random. This process of flipping the cards around is not white, which means it doesn't have an equal chance of every possible combination of the cards, which is really important. The second key stream byte is 0, 1/128th at a time instead of 1 to 256. That's a pretty serious defect just from randomness. It's twice as likely as it should be. So that means you could exploit that if you had a lot of data. And it turns out all of the first 256 bytes are biased, as you would imagine. And here's the weakest attack, which is pretty amazing. The first key stream byte are more likely to be 0 than any other value. So if it's 0, it doesn't encrypt at all, which is true of most cases. If the key is 0, it doesn't change the data at all. So all you have to do is just encrypt something millions of times and take the most likely output, and that will be the plain text. You don't need to know the key at all. It's more likely to leave one byte unchanged than to do anything else. So that's a pretty serious flaw. And so there are attacks out here. A whole series of attacks came out against these various attacks. And the no more, numerous occurrences, monitoring, and recovery was the no more attack, where you inject code to generate requests. You capture the requests, you compute the cookies and try each one. So that was the game. Here's the no more. This can decrypt a cookie in 75 hours if you can get 4,000 encryptions per second. So it takes a lot of data, but in fact, you can do stuff like that on the internet. Somebody's running a server, you can just send a stream of requests. And so RC4 finally met an untimely end. It was popular for a while. Now every protocol using RC4 is now deprecated and we're not supposed to be using them anymore. So Salsa 20 is a new counter-based stream cipher. This one's approved by a lot of people. All right. And so Salsa 20 encryption has 512-bit blocks of plain text, has a counter, it's got a key, a nonce, and a counter, and XORs, adds the initial secret state to the output and XORs it with the plain text. So it's got all the goodies, and it does it by breaking up your data into 4 32-bit words, and then each called A, B, C, and D, and each of them gets shifted left rotated by a certain number of bits, and then combined with others. So this weird mess mixes them all together. And then all right, and that's what bitwise rotation is. If you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you rotate it to the left 8, you'll take the 0 and 1 and roll them here, wrap it around. It's not shifting where one falls off the end, it's rotating them. That's something you can do quite quickly on modern processors. And so it's got a 512-bit state, which is 16 bytes, a 4x4 array of 16 32-bit words. And it's got initial state and nonce words and counter words and fixed constants, you know. And it's got these transformations that mix things around and scramble them. It's a lot like the AES that we talked about last time. And so then you run it through rounds. The Salsa 20 uses 20 rounds. There's a variant that uses only 12 rounds to make it faster, and the mathematicians have found ways to crack it up to 8 rounds, but no way to crack into 12 or 20 rounds. So it's, again, like AES, there's a weaker version that seems strong, and an even stronger version in case anybody ever cracks the weaker version, which is the modern way to do it. So Salsa 20 is probably the best stream cipher to use, but anyway, like I said, very few people are using it because the old stuff is still working. So here's things that can go wrong. If you use the same key and nonce for 2 plain text, and they're both encrypted with identical plain streams, key streams, if you XOR them together, the key stream will vanish, and you have the XOR of the plain texts. The Microsoft Office did this, and one thing about Microsoft Office documents is they have a lot of empty space full of zeros. And therefore, if you had a block of 0 in one of the plain texts, and you XORed it, you encrypted it with another encryption, it would just make the other part turn clear. So all you had to do was take 2 encrypted Word documents and XOR them, and whole bunches of it would just turn clear. So that's pretty gruesome. Microsoft made this mistake many times because people at that time, a lot of people didn't know that you had to have a nonce. They thought you could just use a classic textbook encryption where you take a key and encrypt every block one by one and that's it. And Microsoft kept buying other companies and swallowing their software into their system, so the same mistake would just keep coming back over and over. Anyway, this was, I think, an underhanded coding contest. They said, can you write code with a subtle error? They wrote code to implement RC4 with a subtle error, where it gradually sets something to 0 that shouldn't be set to 0 and slowly chews everything up and eventually stops encrypting entirely. That's another thing, of course, you can make coding errors. And, of course, you can have beat ciphers based into hardware. Since you originally planned to build special hardware for a lot of this, what do you do when it's broken? That's a problem. So sat phones use these export ciphers, and then they sold this equipment. It's adopted by a lot of commercial vendors, so they're buying stuff that has deliberately weak encryption in it, which is probably cheaper to buy. And so this is why the cryptographers are so very angry at the US government, forcing people to sell broken cryptography. They say, don't manufacture anything with bad cryptography in it anywhere, you'll be sorry. That stuff will come back to you, and it'll end up being used in your country and for purposes you didn't intend. You know, you just shouldn't manufacture poison junk and let it out into the ecosystem. Anyway.
You should, I'm sorry. You should not, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just like if you use atomic weapons and you wonder where the fallout's going to blow, or you use bioweapons, you say, oh, this won't come back to us. And, you know, once you release it out there, it's out there and it's going to come back in various ways.
Speaking of atomic weapons, when the Chernobyl disaster happened, all the fallout went toward the Netherlands and southern Belgium within 48 cryptographers that went westward, not eastward.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. That's why,
Gorbachev was still denying officially that it happened.
yeah, that's why the cryptographers often have such an attitude. They call them cryptopunks and stuff. The crypto wars, they also call it, as the cryptographers are always very, very angry at law enforcement and government agencies.
Going back when you said that if you discover some kind of flaw and you want to tell to the company, it's better just not to tell because, they do is usually use it against you.
That's true, yeah. Often telling companies is useless. But, proving that the mathematics is wrong, that could work. I can tell things haven't improved much, too. There was a disclosure like a month ago, some serious flaw, and the guy said, I never bother even telling companies because nobody ever cares. I'm just dumping it publicly. A lot of people do that. There's a few companies that are responsible, like Cisco and Microsoft, and now the Department of Defense. A few of them actually have wised up to listen to vulnerability reports, but that's a very high level of security maturity in a company. Most companies have got no ability to evaluate the security of their product and no ability to understand a report or do anything about it. Probably. Uber was notoriously,
Because they kind of really bubble if you stop them,
Uber, their CEO got thrown. Uber did a lot of horrible things. Hopefully they cleaned up their act now. I don't know. What's that?
They raised the prices.
They did. Well, that was under Travis Kalaniak, the previous guy. They didn't do background checks on their drivers, so their drivers were like criminals and raped and killed people. And so to solve that problem, they added a $1 driver safety fee to every ride and did nothing. So just this fee was there to make you feel like something had been done. So, it's a security theater, yeah. Like the TSA, yeah. Yeah.
TSA was an enactment in 2007 around.
Yeah.
It was the right.
Yep.
Originally, TSA was also created in 1974 as part of Federal hijacking act by the states.
I'll talk about. Well, let's try this. So. All right, which system puts a nonce in the key? That was WEP. That was one of its crazy things. Just takes part of the key and calls it a nonce and treats it as a nonce, which didn't work out well. Which system uses quarter round functions? That's salsa. Broke the thing up into A, B, C, and D and scrambled them. All right, which one uses a session key to protect cookies? Yeah, this is a net plus question. That's how TLS works. You have a cookie to identify you, and it encrypts it with a session key, which uses AES, which is transmitted over public key encryption. These days, usually elliptic curve. And what system has 12 or 20 rounds? That's salsa 20, which I suppose you don't call salsa 20 when it only has 12. Well, I'm not sure what you call it. But anyway, that's the thing, 12 or 20. I would assume you call it salsa 12 then, but what do I know? Anyway. All right. Joseph and Chris. Chris.